2024 marks 7 decades of Godzilla, but the world-famous kaiju has gone through a lot of different forms over the years. We've ranked all the different movie Godzillas from worst to best, accounting for everything from physical strength to pop culture impact. This is obviously a subjective list, and we totally understand if you have some disagreements with our ranking choices. But if you don't think the Godzilla from the 1998 TriStar film should be in last place, you're simply wrong. The first live-action American Godzilla deviated so far from the monster's original vision that it seemingly offended the Toho production company, earning it the diminutive nickname of Zilla. As Godzilla Final Wars producer Shogo Tomiyama infamously said of the film, "It took the god out of Godzilla." Indeed, in Roland Emmerich's retelling of the tale, Godzilla is not an unimaginably powerful monster of untold destruction, but a large dinosaur that is pretty easily managed by the American military. Viewing it in comparison with the original Godzilla, which stood as a metaphor for atomic destruction, this Jurassic Park-style take on the character reflects the late 90s American hubris that believed there was no problem that couldn't be solved with missiles and soldiers. It's a common misconception that the TriStar Godzilla and the version of Zilla that appears in Final Wars are one and the same, but Zilla is actually a separate enemy inspired by the 1998 film. That makes TriStar Godzilla as a true dud of a kaiju with little legacy or impact.
I knew that tuna head wasn't up to much. Next.
Not a lot of people seem to know about the Netflix Godzilla trilogy, which brought the kaiju into the medium of anime. Conceptually, this version of Godzilla should be among the best on the list. But what good is a concept if the execution turns out to be disappointing? Godzilla Earth, so named because of his successful conquering of the entire planet, is the largest and most powerful of any iteration of the character, distinguished only by his admittedly awe-inspiring destructive capability. But even ignoring the surprisingly mediocre story at the heart of the anime Godzilla trilogy, Godzilla Earth manages to miss the mark because the series' animation style doesn't do his colossal power justice. Animation has the potential for smooth movement that can be hard to capture in live action, but that doesn't stop Godzilla Earth from moving exceptionally stiffly and awkwardly, especially when compared to the evolving version of the kaiju seen in the anime series, Godzilla Singular Point. It's clear that the animated movie Godzilla is far from the best. When it came time for the Millennium era of Godzilla films to come to a close in 2004, it rather serendipitously coincided with the 50th anniversary of the original 1954 Godzilla film. Naturally, Godzilla Final Wars served as both a tribute to the character's lasting impact and historical significance in popular culture, and a send-off for the franchise for the foreseeable future. This version of Godzilla isn't necessarily bad, but he's not unique enough to warrant being placed above the majority of his peers. Final Wars Godzilla is designed to synthesize all identifiable characteristics of the character into one being, but the result is simply Godzilla at his safest, creatively speaking. At least he can throw hands and perform some WWE-worthy takedowns. While this quintessential look is great for a tribute piece, it lacks the forward-facing visual improvements that were originally intended to make this final Godzilla truly stand out from his predecessors. In the end of Godzilla Final Wars, the King of Monsters forgives humanity for the first time on screen, thanks in part to his goofy-looking son, Manila. It's poetic as an end to Godzilla's story, but it doesn't square with his history. From writing to design to execution, everything about this Godzilla feels disappointingly safe. Ranking the Millennium-era Godzillas can be incredibly difficult. Each incarnation is technically unique, but so similar in design and impact to the others that it mainly comes down to how the individual films use the character. The version of the kaiju seen in Godzilla against Mecha Godzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS is perfectly fine in a vacuum, but he isn't utilized in the best ways throughout the two movies. As you might expect, Godzilla against Mecha Godzilla is all about the robotic version of the monster as well, and sometimes the mecha can even overshadow the original. There's nothing wrong with giving Godzilla's cyborg counterpart some cool backstory, but it gets problematic when it comes at regular Godzilla's expense. These films have such an obvious fondness for Godzilla's robotic adversary, in fact, that they attempt to give him more complex characterization and a hero's death. If all that weren't enough, this Godzilla is referred to as Kiryu Godzilla. Kiryu being the new name given to Mecha Godzilla. Godzilla 2000 Millennium is in many ways an ideal Godzilla film. It's just as far from the worst as it is from being the best, but it delivers plenty of destructive action without trying to punch too far above its weight class in terms of plot. This simple yet solid approach to the revival of the franchise was reflected in its redesign of Godzilla, rather than attempting to reinvent him entirely. Novel additions were made that felt fresh, yet supportive of what was already there. All in all, Godzilla 2000 is a meat and potatoes Godzilla, with a little extra seasoning to keep things spicy. The only reason he's not further up on the list is that his superior peers have stronger storylines and characterizations. Like many Godzilla films, 2000 attempts to reconcile the kaiju's reputation as a destroyer and protector, culminating in a bleak final scene that seemingly depicts him deciding to destroy Tokyo. There's a confused rage to his characterization here that, while not nearly as strong as higher entries on this list, is nihilistic to the point of feeling incredibly powerful.
Godzilla!
If you've ever seen a clip of Godzilla doing something truly wacky, chances are it was the second Godzilla of the Showa era. For people who love campy tokusatsu action, this makes his movies great. But for the fans who prefer Godzilla's raids to be solemn affairs, they can be hit or miss. Second Showa Godzilla is almost like a Golden Age comic book character. His stories are so numerous and varied that they range from unabashed goofiness to genuinely great entries in the sprawling franchise. Although some choose to ignore the more ridiculous aspects of his characterization over the years, and prefer to judge him by his impact, others feel the need to stand behind second-generation Godzilla in totality in order to truly appreciate his spirit. Without this shift from straight-up devastator to quasi-defender, however, the Godzilla franchise wouldn't have given birth to dozens of the incredible kaiju that fans have come to love. By being in 14 of the first 15 movies in the franchise, the second Showa Godzilla established the foundation that every Godzilla since has built upon. The higher-ranking entries on this list, except for one, simply wouldn't exist without this version of Godzilla. When Hollywood made plans to tackle Godzilla again after the disastrous attempt in 1998, there was some understandable apprehension among longtime fans of the series. But now, after a handful of movies and a TV show, it's become clear that Legendary Pictures could have done a whole lot worse. Even though the Godzilla of the MonsterVerse is rendered solely with CGI animation, the effects are still more realistic than performers in rubber suits. Jaw-dropping moments like the execution of the female Muto in the 2014 film simply wouldn't have been possible if not for the work of talented CGI artists. This Godzilla proved that advances in visual effects technology could truly make the King of the Monsters a force to be reckoned with. From a design standpoint, the minor adjustments made to emphasize Godzilla's animalistic nature are effective, but subtle enough that he's still instantly recognizable as the giant lizard the world has come to love. America still hasn't quite mastered the art of the perfect Godzilla, but the MonsterVerse version is definitely a step forward.
Good thing he's on our side.
For now.
The Millennium era had a clear preference for leaning harder into the villainous side of Godzilla than previous eras had. Where other continuities would normally use a different villain, like Mothra or Ghidorah, to give the King of Monsters an enemy that wasn't the innocent population of Tokyo, the Millennium era depicted human characters almost like protagonists in a horror movie. This strategy can overshadow Godzilla, as was the case with Kiryu in Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. But in Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, Godzilla is finally given the role of an unapologetically evil and vindictive villain. This Godzilla embodies a disgust with humanity, treating living humans as worthy of nothing but punishment and suffering for past transgressions. It's up to Mothra, Ghidorah, and the human race to take down this dark version of their rival once and for all. For many Godzilla fans, the Heisei Godzilla is the definitive post-1954 version of the character. And that's not just because it dominated the 90s, earning it the uncritical and undying loyalty of 90s kids. The Heisei era was able to rein in the more outlandish parts of the franchise, while maintaining the propulsive, anything-can-happen style sci-fi that makes the Showa era so fun, despite some of its goofiness. The result is a Godzilla that feels tonally closer to the 1954 version, but doesn't turn its back on the unexpected concepts that already resonated with audiences. Similar to the Legendary Pictures iteration of the character, the smartest change the Heisei era made was bringing a sense of danger back to Godzilla by not allowing him to become a true hero. Godzilla is never your friend. You're just not always his enemy. This version of Godzilla is also uniquely varied in its appearance, as though it were continuing to evolve throughout the series in reaction to the various monsters it has had to battle. This Godzilla storyline culminates in dramatic fashion with Godzilla vs. Destroya, which brilliantly portrays a knockdown drag-out fight between two monsters as a Shakespearean tragedy. As Heisei Godzilla melts down from within, it's genuinely moving, and it works because so much care was put into his characterization over the years. Cry recency bias all you want, but Godzilla -1 proved itself to be an outstanding entry in the franchise, and it has an Oscar nomination for Best Visual Effects to prove it. The kaiju himself isn't actually on screen all that much in this entry, but when he is, he's a truly awe-inspiring presence, capable of instantly decimating metropolitan areas, much like the bombs that inspired his creation. -1 Godzilla thrives in the water, but that doesn't make him any less of a fearsome presence on land. He has incredible strength and remarkable regeneration abilities. And since he's launching his attack in the late 40s, the human heroes don't exactly have the most advanced technology at their disposal. The newest Godzilla on this list has established himself as a truly terrifying force of nature, who atomic-breathed new life into a 70-year-old franchise. Of all the redesigns that the King of Monsters has undergone, none were as complete, successful, or terrifying as Shin Godzilla. Rather than depict the King of Monsters as the hulking atomic brawler he was before the 12-year post-millennium era hiatus, Shin Godzilla is a slimy creature with multiple forms just trying to survive. When Shin Godzilla first emerges, he's in agonizing pain, and he can't help but pass on some of that pain to the people of Japan. Once he's had a little time to grow, he evolves into a monster closer to the Godzilla we're familiar with, but with some flourishes that feel straight out of a horror movie. As Shin Godzilla prepares to unleash his atomic breath in the film's most impressive scene, his jaw splits in half, and he billows cancerous black smog across the city. As the first Japanese reboot of the kaiju in over a decade, Shin Godzilla kicked off the franchise's Reiwa era in unforgettable fashion. Even though it's been 70 years since the King of all monsters first invaded cinemas, no Godzilla is better than the very first one who rose from the depths of Tokyo Bay in 1954. He may not technically be the biggest, the strongest, or the flashiest, but the first Showa Godzilla will always be the one that started it all. That said, the original Godzilla isn't only great just because he was the first. His rampage is a work of art that, thanks in part to the black and white coloring, feels timeless even in comparison to modern versions that use more complex suits and CGI animation. Even though he dies at the end of his first outing, all that means is that his reputation will never be sullied. No matter how many more movies featuring Godzilla end up being released in the future, every single version of the iconic kaiju will always exist in the shadow of the original. The first Showa Godzilla easily takes the #1 spot on our list, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon.